Hi everyone, so I've been asked a lot about how we set up our shorelines or shorefasts when we stay in tight bays like these. So I thought I'd make a short video about our techniques and our gear. You know, there are a few important things that need to be mentioned about the forces in play and the mistakes that you can make. So please don't start using these techniques before giving those also a thought. I'll talk more about those later on in this video. There are a few reasons that you might want to use shorefasts, the most common one being that sometimes the water is just so deep that you cannot put out enough scope for normal bow anchoring, so you are forced to attach to the shore instead. You know, maybe you just want to go to a tiny cove where anchoring is not possible. And although we are in the Arctic and we mostly use the lines more to big boulders at the shore, the same principles and the way that the forces work also applies in many other situations. You know, you're using the same techniques also when you are mooring using trees, or when you are stern tie anchoring in the Pacific Northwest, or if you are doing the so-called Baltic mooring, and also if you are using like two anchors for Bahamian mooring or whatever it's called. But first, let's have a look at an example case where we moor in this small bay, and where the end result will look something like this, at least when the weather is sunny. You know, when we filmed this it was kind of cloudy and grey, but when it's sunny this is what it will look like. We are going to go to this small cove and we are going to use shorelines to moor there, because this place is it's too deep to really anchor well, and there's a lot of katabatic winds here, so you need to attach your boat like really well over here, and we are expecting some quite hard winds the coming days. Today it's probably like 10 knots, but the gusts are up to 20 knots and they are coming down the mountains. And I'm just going to go quickly over how we do this and what kind of gear we use for it, and a couple pointers on things to watch out for. It's just one example of how we do it at this one particular place. What we have for the gear here are these polypropylene lines, 16 millimeters thick I think, and they have like a breaking strength of 5 to 6 tons or something like that. And this is like cheap, like it's really cheap line. We have two lengths of 110 meters each, so over 300 feet each, and that's probably like almost like the minimum that you need. And the thing with polypropylene is that it is like you need to buy it quite thick, because it doesn't have a really good breaking strength, especially if you compare it with Spectra or Dyneema or something like that. But it is cheap and it floats, which is like one of the most important things, because when you are handling these long lines it's impossible to take them to the land and back to the boat if it doesn't float. So the lines like really need to float, otherwise you are pretty screwed. So yeah, these lines float, and they are not high-tech lines by any means, but they work quite well. But if you have a bigger boat, and if your boat weighs like 15 tons or 20 tons or whatever, then you probably need to buy Spectra or Dyneema, and then you can buy something that's not as thick. But then one of the things with those is that it doesn't stretch, and the polypropylene line it still stretches quite well. So personally I like this cheap plastic line, and it also doesn't absorb any water, so that's really good. And now during the winter, because it doesn't absorb any water, it also doesn't freeze, so the knots are easy to tie and untie. The ropes are in these bags. One of them is an IKEA bag, it's actually a little bit too small, and the other rope is in a big sail bag, and the sail bag is actually quite ideal. And the way that the ropes are in the bags are that you have to flake them in, so you don't coil them, you flake them, so that once you take the rope it comes out of the bag really easily. You can just have it in the dinghy, for example, and you can just throw. You don't have to care about the line, it will pay out the line like pretty much automatically. Yeah, that's how it's actually at least supposed to work. Let's see how we do this time. Hey, hey! Okay, so Sohvi is now taking the first line out and we have our game plan set. And the thing with shorelines is that you always need to have some kind of a game plan, and it's going to vary from place to place. You always need to improvise a little bit. So it's never going to be like that easy to determine what the best steps are. But I'm just going to tell you what we are doing this time. So this is the map, and we are going to have the boat here in the middle, and we're going to have the lines here from the shore and then here from this small skerry, which you can see right over there. That's the small skerry. And if you've seen some of my videos before, you might have seen this place before. So we have been here before already, so I already know that there are two big boulders here that you can attach to, and then there are two big boulders over here as well. So that's actually quite ideal. Big boulders are the best anchors because you know that they are never going to fail. So when you do this shoreline stuff, you always need to improvise, but now the wind is coming from approximately here most of the time, or maybe from here. So we're going to attach the line to this shore first, and Sohvi is going now taking it out and attaching it. And then what we're gonna do is I'm gonna come in with the sailboat, and she's gonna give me the line, and I'm gonna attach it to probably to the stern of the boat, because that way I can put the throttle forward or the gear forward, and with the rudder I can then control the boat and where I am. Because if I attach it from the bow, then it's going to be much harder for me to do that, because I won't get any wash from the propeller to the rudder. So you know, that's why we're probably gonna attach it to the stern. There is of course the option that you might be, you know, you could maybe anchor here with a really short scope, but actually here it's too deep to really anchor, and I don't know, but it's sometimes it is an option, but we're not going to do it this time. Alright, in the meanwhile Sohvi is doing all the hard work, so let's take her point of view here. First she rows to the shore and attaches the dinghy so that it doesn't escape. Then she takes the shoreline around the big boulder. This boulder is what I would call a completely bomb-proof anchor. When you put the line around it and make a loop that is tight enough, then there is no way for the line to go off, no matter which direction the pull is coming from. This boulder is also just around or above the high water mark, so it's still possible to untie the line at high water. Sohvi is making a normal bowline knot here. It's not the best knot for retaining the rope's breaking strength, but it's easy to untie and sufficient for our use. Once all that is done, it's time to get back into the dinghy and wait for the Mr. Lazy Guy to come around with the sailboat and give him the line. After attaching one stern line, it's now time to attach one bowline so that the sailboat stays in position without the need for engine. So now Sohvi is taking the second line out, and the first line she took all herself, so she had the bag in the dinghy with her. But this second one, we'll have it like this, so we have the bag inside the mothership, and usually I pay out the line, or I just make sure that it pays out well. And this is so that now that when she has this line attached, then I can just pull it tight and I can attach it to the sailboat, and then we are set. Otherwise, you know, if she had the boat bag in the dinghy with her, then she would have to bring the line also back to the sailboat. So she's taking the second line right now, and the first line is already here, and you can see it's attached to the big boulder over there, and I've attached it to the stern cleat over here, and I have the gearing forward, and I can control where I'm going with the wheel, and how I have it over here. So now, you know, if I get a sudden gust of wind from an unexpected direction, then I need to get out of here as quickly as possible, and that's why I have it like this over here, that, you know, I didn't take the bag in board. I have the line is outside of the push bit, or is it pull bit, I don't know. So if I need to, I can just open this line, take it away from the cleat, and I can just throw this bag overboard, and I can be on my way. Alright, that was our example, but let's quickly go over a few things that I didn't mention yet. The most important one being the forces that the whole system can be subject to if you are not careful. But first, a few things about the technique. This video only showed you how you set up the first stern and the first bow line, and after that you would set up more lines. In this particular place we had 4 shorefasts in total, and the most critical part of the whole process is, of course, to get to the point where the boat is steadied between 2 anchors that are, you know, 2 shore anchors, so that the boat cannot hit the shore anymore. And after that you can easily set up more anchor points. But basically there's 3 ways to achieve this initial steadying of the boat, so to say, and one of them we already showed you in this video, and that is that one person rows out with the dinghy, and that person has 1 line with them, and once that line is attached to an anchor point on the shore, then the person gives it back to the sailboat, and then the person rowing the dinghy goes to the next anchor point as quickly as possible and sets up the next line. And, you know, then when you attach the next line to the sailboat, then the sailboat is pretty much safe. The second way is that the person who is rowing sets up a continuous line between the 2 anchor points. So in this case it would have been so that Sohvi would have set a continuous line between the shore and the skerry, you know, using 1 anchor point at the shore and 1 anchor point at the skerry. And then I would have just come in with the sailboat, and I would have picked up the floating line with a boat hook from the middle, and then I would have attached it to the boat, and then after that there is no way for the boat to float off and go onto the rocks. If you do that really wisely, of course, you could do that with 2 lines, so that there is a knot in the middle, so that the sailboat would come in and pick up the line approximately where the knot is, and then you can untie the knot and you can tie 1 line to the stern of the boat and 1 line to the bow of the boat. This takes more time than the technique that we used in the video, but it is especially useful if it's blowing quite a lot and if you don't have much space to maneuver, and if you're unsure about maneuvering with your sailboat. This one makes it a little bit safer, but it takes more time as well. The third way to achieve this initial steadying would be to anchor temporarily, and this is the only way to do this if you are alone, by the way, and it's only possible if the water is shallow enough and if there's not too much wind, you know, so you would anchor with a really short scope and then set up the lines basically. Sometimes you can do this if the weather is nice, and it does make the whole process a little bit more simple, but quite often in these places where you have to use shorelines, it's not possible to do that. Okay, then some more important things about the gear. We use this cheap polypropylene line as our shoreline because it floats and it doesn't absorb water, and it's cheap to buy at the fishery supply stores, and you can still get it with a rated breaking strength. So you know, it's not just some random line, it does have a rated breaking strength, and it also stretches under shock loads, which I think is important, but not everyone agrees on that. Some people believe that a completely static rope would be better, and if you have a bigger boat, then you need to look into buying Spectra or Dyneema shorelines anyway, because the polypropylene line gets too thick at high breaking strength and it becomes impossible to handle. But whatever you buy, it must float. That's like really important. Otherwise it's completely impossible to handle the line with the dinghy. It's impossible to get 100 meters of line to the shore if it drags on the bottom. So as you can see, we don't have rope reels on our boat. Some high latitude boats have those, you know, they have a rope reel at the stern of the boat or something for the stern lines. But we found that the rope bags work really well for us, and it's pretty much only occasional use anyway. And yeah, like I mentioned, it's just really important that you flake the rope inside the bag. Don't coil the rope because that will get you in trouble. You need to flake it so that it comes out of the bag kind of automatically. You probably also need to set up shave protection because the lines shave against sharp rocks easily. And to be honest, we don't really set up that much shave protection because we haven't really had that much problems with shave. But Sylvia is not a huge boat, and this polypropylene line is quite abrasion resistant. But you know, this might be different for others. Sometimes I do set up 2 loops of rope that go around each anchor point just to make sure that if one loop fails, then we have a backup loop just in case. And I know that some people use chain, like anchor chain, to go around the boulders, but we haven't done that yet. I also know that some people use wire rope. You know, you make these loops of wire rope and then you use those to build the anchor points. And even Skip Novak suggests using those on one of his Yachting World videos, but I have heard of couple confirmed cases of these wire rope loops failing, and one of them was on Skip's own boat, so that's not a method that I would personally suggest. Last but definitely not least, we have to talk about the most important thing and the most complex thing here, and that's the forces associated with using more than one anchor point. If you are only using ropes that go pretty much straight out from the bow and stern of the boat, and then the wind starts coming from the side of the boat, you know, I mean from the beam, then you need to realize that you're dealing with really high forces in comparison to normal anchoring. Let's take a look at our example again and imagine that the wind would start coming from the side. Because we don't have an anchor point towards the side of the boat, then these 2 anchor points would take the load, and in this case the angle between the anchors would perhaps be around 160 degrees. And please correct me if my mathematics are wrong here, but we can calculate that the force on each anchor point would be 2.8 times as much as if the angle was 0 degrees, like when you're anchored using a bow anchor, you know. So in this case you would have almost 3 times as much force on the anchor points compared to using a bow anchor. And let's remember that because now the boat's beam is exposed to the wind, you have more area exposed, and the initial force is already higher to begin with. So in reality, in this case, you could easily have forces that are 4 times as big as when using a normal bow anchor. You know, you would have 4 times as much force at each anchor point, and this is when things can really start chafing. And in storm force winds, even if your anchor points themselves hold, your cleats and other stuff on the boat might start breaking. Let's take a look at this table here, and keep in mind that this is the force experienced, or the load experienced, by a single anchor point in a 2 anchor point system. And you have to realize that when we are talking about boats, then you cannot really divide the forces between more than 2 anchor points. The boat is always going to be resting against 2 anchor points in a situation like this. So an angle of 160 degrees resulted in 2.8 times the load, but an angle of 150 would have only been 2 times the load. So one could then ask, yeah, would it then be wise to ease the lines so that we would get a better angle? You know, you could give a little bit of slack into the lines and the angle gets better. Yeah, maybe yes, but then on the other hand, maybe not, because then you would have more play in the system and the boat would be moving more. And especially combined with some chop in the anchorage, it might create some snagging loads and so on. So, you know, personally, if there's no chop, I do pay out a bit more line to create a slightly better angle. So let's look at the table again, and we'll see that 170 degrees angle between the anchor points is almost 6 times as big load. So it probably doesn't make sense to tighten the lines with a winch. And you know, once you approach 180 degrees, the load actually theoretically starts approaching infinity. But you'll see that 120 degrees is the break-even point, and if the angle is less than 120 degrees, then the load on each anchor in a static situation starts being less than 1. So that means that the load starts being divided between the anchors, kind of. But then again, this would be in a static situation, so each anchor will still need to be able to take the full force anyway, because you know the boat will be moving around and it will not have a steady pull on the anchors. So you can't say, hey, I have like a pretty weak looking tree there, but then there's another tree and the angle between them is only 60 degrees, so I can safely use them as anchor points, because they will divide, you know, the load will be divided. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way either. You need anchor points that can take the full load anyway. You can see that it all starts getting like quite complex, and when you count in some margins and account for the fact that you've got more area exposed to the wind than when bow anchoring, I think that if you're expecting strong winds from a certain direction, then anything more than around a 90 degree angle between the anchor points in that direction is not really acceptable. So that's just kind of my personal rule, and it's 120 degrees between anchor points is another rule to remember, because anything above that, if the angle is anything more than that, then things start getting quite crappy. One thing to keep in mind is that you can of course take your bow anchor and reserve anchor and use them to build anchor points, but I'm not going to talk about that in more detail. And there are also some other things that we haven't talked about, for example snagging forces that can be created by big chop and waves and so on, but I haven't got the time and I haven't got the expertise for all that. But the key takeaway is that this kind of mooring is mostly for special situations, and I mostly do it for the fun of it, because I like to moor my boat in weird places. And setting up all these lines actually takes a lot of time, and most of the time using a bow anchor is a lot easier and also a lot more reliable. So actually, if you look at the example images I showed you, you will notice that the angles between the anchor points are not acceptable for all wind directions. So actually I wouldn't be happy with any of these setups during a storm that could come from any direction. You will also notice that in my next video that I will post, because in that one we will have to leave this specific bay that we visited in this example, because there is a storm coming our way. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one and maybe it was even useful for you. In that case, you know, please subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. It's completely free and it actually helps me out quite a lot. And at this point, I want to also say huge thanks to my patrons. I've been overwhelmed with the support that I've received, and if you also want to support the production of these videos, and if you want to see the exact location where these example shots were taken, then you can consider joining us on Patreon. I'll post the link down below in the description. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye. Taistellaan.